Welcome back to Papa's Home, and today I want to talk about sprinkler valves. Unfortunately, all my sprinklers just stopped working, and the reason is because I just replaced my water main. I didn't realize that my sprinkler lines were directly connected to the water main before, so as a result, they just don't really work. I talked to my plumber and he was able to finagle them a little bit and was able at least to get the front lawn working. My new garden beds, my fruit trees, none of them are getting water, and as a result, I have to water them manually. So in today's episode, I want to talk about what it takes to get those sprinkler valves fixed, what it costs, and what my different options are. Option one is to get the plumber to reconnect the sprinkler valves. So I reached out to my plumber and I asked for a quote. I'm guessing that this type of project would probably cost $1,000 maybe to $1,500, and I think I'd be okay with paying that. And his quote was $2,600. Which was a lot more than I kind of expected, but it's not terrible. So I decided to get a second opinion. I talked to the company that installed my garden beds and the fruit trees and also set up all the sprinklers. So they ran all new sprinkler lines, put in the valves and everything. And I think the total cost for bringing the soil and the plants and putting them in and running all new sprinkler lines was around $2,000. So I kind of had a feeling that the gardening company would actually charge me a lot less. Turns out they came back and said that it's going to cost $3,400. So my third option is to do some of it myself. I really don't feel confident enough to do the whole thing and connect it to my water source. So instead what I think I'll do is I'll rent a trencher and I'll dig the trenches myself. I'll need the plumber to tell me exactly where I need to dig. The second thing I'm going to do is build a sprinkler manifold. For those who don't know what a manifold is, think of it as like just a whole bunch of sprinkler valves all connected into like one system. So with that, let's jump into actually building it. So the first thing that I started with on this project was to take a 2-foot section of pipe and put it in my fittings without putting any sort of glue or anything. This is called a dry fit. This will help me understand if there's going to be any issues in terms of the length of the pipe and give me a rough idea of what the final thing will actually look like. So you'll notice I put a couple of hash marks here. There's 3 of them for 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and 1.25 inch. That way it just gave me some really good guidelines in terms of how deep the pipe actually fit. From what you can kind of see here, one pipe fitting went in about 3/4 inch in, another was 1 inch, and I knew I wanted to make this pretty compact. As a result, I wanted to give myself about a 1/4 inch gap in between the pipes. This is super close. If you prefer to give yourself a little bit of leeway, you have some options there to make your pipe a little bit longer, but that's your choice. As a result, the length of my pipes ended up being about 2 inches. So what I did was I took my pipe cutter and did my best to make sure that it was a clean, straight cut at 2 inches in length. That 2-inch section then became my template. I could have measured out 2 inches every single time, but that kind of takes a while. So I decided that I would just use this one as my template and make sure that I constantly have several fittings that are about 2 inches each. In the end, when I got down to the last section of the 2-foot pipe, I was left with one part that I could cut at 2 inches. The other was less than 2 inches. I didn't bother measuring it, I just knew that it was going to be a scrap. What you can see here is that a 2-foot section of pipe yielded me about 11 pieces. The last piece was not 2 inches in length. Something to keep in mind is that as you're cutting it, it's not going to be exactly precise of 2 inches, which is why that last little section right there didn't quite make it to the 2-inch mark. But that's totally fine, that's why we buy a bunch of these. Now you can see I've got 5 groups of 4, and one standing off by its own. Now using 3 2-foot pipes, I have all the 2-inch cuts that I need. You can see I've got 3 that are not 2 inches. I made sure to label them so I don't get them confused. You can also see which one I used as the template. I'm not going to mark it as a template because it already has a ton of markings on it, and it's already really easy to identify. So for the next part of the project, I'm going to work with my 1-inch sprinkler valves and these 2 fittings right here. This valve is pretty expensive. It cost about $24. It's got an anti-siphon valve to keep my drinking water fresh and clean. Here's a manual shut-off, which I can give this a 1/4 inch turn, allowing me to turn it off or on. You'll also see the wires so that it'll let me control it from my sprinkler device. Right here is a pressure control valve that'll adjust the water flow or reduce the pressure. This last knob right here is used to let any dirt or debris out of the system. Here you can see that the water needs to go up through the valve. If water tries to shoot back up, it'll just come out of the anti-siphon valve. Here you can see the connection is threaded on one side and is a slip fit on the other. I'm going to do another dry fit of the pipes just to see how easy it is to put on. However, I'm going to have to put on TPFE tape, which is really going to make this a lot more difficult. This is TPFE tape, also called plumber's tape. What I need to do is run it along clockwise so that when I make the connection to the valve, that it doesn't come undone. It comes in a blue tube like this, and you can easily pull off the tape. With one hand, I'm going to hold the fitting, and I'm going to pinch the tape onto the thread. The tape I'm using here is 3/4 inch wide, and it cost me $3 for just one. I want to make sure that there's overlap with the tape edges. When I'm done, I will have gone around about 6 to 8 times. Using my finger, I'm able to tear off the tape. Next, I'm going to use my fingernail, and I'm going to run the tape into the threads. Looking for any raised sections, I run my fingernail through the threads again. Now I'm hand tightening this. However, with the tape, now it becomes a lot more difficult, and I'm going to have to use some additional tools. Going to the tool chest, I grab one of the wrenches and vice grips. Make sure you turn it the correct way so you don't undo your work. Unfortunately, I decided that I'm going to do 8 valves, which means that I'm going to have to repeat this process about 16 times. So at this point, I'm going to take one of my 2-inch PVC pipes, then I'm going to grab one of my unions, and then I'm going to unscrew it. You can actually see that a union is actually 3 different pieces. And this part is called the O-ring. I'm going to be using Christie's purple primer. For this whole project, I got away with just using 1 can. Then I had to use 3 cans of red hot blue glue. Also, Keen Coffee, it's just the best. Please sponsor me. One of the first things that I do is I'm going to take the female end with the O-ring, and I'm going to take one of the little 2-inch PVC pipes. The reason I'm using unions in my design is that if I ever have an issue with the valve, all I have to do is unscrew the valve, then reattach a new one. One thing to note is that you just kind of alternate in this pattern. You start by priming the union, and you definitely want to wear gloves because this can get really messy. Then I prime the PVC pipe, making sure to rotate and get all the spots that I missed. Then I switch back to the union and apply one more coat of primer. So you kind of see all I was really doing was alternating. I start with the union, then the pipe, then the union again. Then I move on to the glue. And it's going to be the same thing where you're alternating. So last time we left off with the union, we're going to start with the pipe, then do the union, then finish with the pipe. And you can see you really want a hefty amount. And I'm going to twist and push to make sure that we have a really tight connection. Be sure to remove any excess. And then what we do is the exact same process, but for the other end of the union. That means for 8 valves, I need 16 unions, which adds another 32 connections to this whole thing. So as you can see here, then I end up with one complete union set. And then I repeat this process. But I also go outside because the fumes are getting really strong. So once I take all my 2-inch pipes and glue them to the unions, I'm going to reassemble them so you can see what they look like. But really, they need to be taken apart. Like, really apart. So in this picture, you can actually see here's all the different sprinkler valves and the unions once they're actually screwed apart. Then I want to do a dry fit with the ends that have the O-rings on them. Once I do that, I'm going to start gluing some of the pieces together. You'll notice that I first organize everything by height. The reason is when I take these unions and connect them to the valves, I want to make sure that they're about even. That way it doesn't look lopsided. I'm not going to show another video showing how to glue pipes, but you can see what the finished result looks like. I'm actually going to jump to build a different part now. I'm going to focus on the main water supply line and how it fits into the base. What you can see here is something that I pre-assembled. All it is a bunch of T's and PVC pipes. I didn't really measure the exact length, but I just did some dry fit and cut a few pieces, and figured out what was the best way to make all this fit. Yes, I wasted a lot of pipe, but at the same time, it's only $2 for 2 feet of pipe. Here you can see where I'm trying to line up the T's with the outlets on the base. Now that I'm good with that measurement, I'm going to find a way to flatten the T's so they're all facing the same direction. The way that I'm designing this system, it doesn't really matter if they line up perfectly, so it's not a big deal. Applying some pressure on the T's, god damn it, it just sounds so dirty. By taking the T's and pushing them on the table, I'm able to get them all level. Once I have them level, I'm going to take a piece of cardboard, and I'm going to take a fine tip Sharpie, and I'm going to mark a straight line all the way across. That way I know when each of these fittings are even with each other. For the sake of moving things along, you can see that all these T's are now glued to each other. And this next step, I'm going to take a dry fit of 1/2 of the unions, notice the part that does not have the O-ring, and I'm going to connect it to the T's. One thing that I realized by doing this dry fit was that I needed to put the screw cap in between the two. I'm really glad that I figured this out on the first try, instead of gluing 16 connections. So now that these are glued together, you can see that the screw cap for the union is able to move around. I really had to make sure that I didn't accidentally glue these together, so you can see I was constantly fidgeting with them. Once they're actually set up, then I can take each section of the manifold and separate them into groups of 4, because I can only fit 4 valves in a box. Using the screw caps on the unions, I'm now able to attach the main water supply line. What I'm also going to show right now is just what it looks like when you connect a union to one of these connections right here. In the next step, I'm going to attach the lines that'll go to the individual sprinklers. Using the same gluing technique that I showed earlier, I'm going to take a union and connect it to an elbow. From there, I'm going to connect another 2-foot pipe, and it's going to allow me to complete this manifold. In the end, this almost cost me $400 in parts. I'm really hoping that working with the plumber, I can really reduce the cost of this overall project. One thing that I will say is that by doing it myself, I learned a lot about sprinkler systems, and in the future, I think this is going to be really easy to maintain and make changes to. In the next episode, I'm going to be running a trencher. I've never really used one before. It's a little bit scary, but you know what? I really want to try to save a couple $100, so let's see how that one goes. Thanks for coming to Papa's Home.